We are currently editing my second book here live. So let's pick up from where we last left off, which was talking about how I managed to break free from the prison that I was trapped in, which was my home, but I called it a prison, and that I moved back to my parents' house and I started to go on this journey of self-discovery. So let's talk about the next chapter, which is titled Now What? Because in that moment I was a little bit confused and overwhelmed that I had all this time on my hands now and thought, what am I going to do with my life? So this is exactly what I done. So it was my first weekend back in my local area and I had not been out there for several years prior. I decided to go to a local pub, but promised myself that I was not going to fall back into that pre-trauma lifestyle. Whilst out socialising, I bumped into a bunch of school friends who were extremely curious about what I had been doing with my life post head injury. They said that they had heard about me moving back to my parents and wanted to know what my plans were for the future. I told them that I planned to visit a different country every single month for a complete year. Some were truly fascinated, but others were doubtful. Then someone said something which doubted my abilities to complete the challenge I had set myself. I didn't know how to reply to him initially, and then started to question my own abilities. I thought about it for a brief moment and then replied with, "I will show you." I had to take immediate action, so ordered a cab and went straight home and booked a one-way flight to Croatia, leaving in the next few days' time. This uncomfortable action step was the very beginning of my self-development journey. The trip to Croatia where I went island hopping for 2 weeks was absolutely incredible. From then on, I stayed committed to my goal of visiting a different country every month and thoroughly enjoyed every moment whilst I was away travelling all by myself. Travelling solo made me feel like a new man, as I had a feeling of independence, courage and pure excitement. I managed to meet a new bunch of like-minded friends from all over the globe. These types of people would help push me outside of my comfort zone to achieve the things that I would never have done otherwise. And without even realising it, I was suddenly becoming truly happy in my own company. This made me realise that who we surround ourselves with has a huge part on our own personal progression, and that surrounding ourselves with positive, like-minded individuals is crucial for self-development. Before long, I was pushing myself outside of my comfort zone on a much regular basis. And please remember that this is the guy who was super fearful of doing anything. I remembered visiting Barcelona one month after my Croatia trip. The day before I was going to leave, I found out that there were mass protests, rioting and things being set on fire within the city. Everybody around me suggested that I didn't go. However, I ignored them and went to check this madness out for myself. As I was travelling into Barcelona centre while sat on the train, I remembered looking up on the freeway and seeing demonstrators marching as far as the eye could see. I started to ask myself the question, had I made a bad decision? When I arrived, it was extremely busy and there were many people protesting, but none of this seemed to look anything like what the news was feeding us back at home. It was more like a giant street party. Over the course of the next 3 days, I managed to visit all the places I wanted to visit with minimal disruption. Yes, I saw lots of police pushing protesters back, and I also saw several burning bins. However, these arson attacks were nothing to do with the peaceful protests. I still had a fantastic time and do not regret committing to my decision to visit. Once I returned home, I told myself that I would stop watching the news from then on. When you embark on your very own journey, there will be people telling you that you are crazy, stupid and wrong for doing what you're doing. And sometimes even you who is telling yourself. This is why it's so important to learn how to silence those voices, both external and internal, so that you can trust in your own intuition to guide you in the correct direction of where you ultimately want to be. Next chapter, progress equals happiness. When I wasn't travelling the world, I would find myself sat at my parents' house feeling pretty down, because in that moment I felt that I had no purpose or sense of direction in life. In all honesty, I was still quite often break down in tears. However, this time I was no longer upset about my past, but about my future instead. I needed something to keep my mind busy and something to focus on, so I took up reading as a new hobby. The only books I remember reading prior to this were Biff, Chip and Kipper books at school, but I began to read non-fictional personal development books, and before you know it, I was totally hooked. I remember reading a quote that said, "Progress equals happiness," and it got me thinking back to when I was depressed. I wasn't progressing in life, and that's the reason why I was so unhappy. I didn't walk around telling everyone how happy I didn't walk around telling anyone about how I had split up with my partner and how I was moving back to my parents. But on the other hand, when I was progressing in my life and travelling the world, I would tell everybody about it with so much joy and excitement. I realised that I had to find people to socialise with in my area that were either heading in the same direction as I was, or who had already reached the goals that I was also reaching for. I started to talk to a mixture of people in my local community that I would never have normally talked to. These types of people understood me. They were excited to talk about my plans, and they had very positive attitudes about life in general. These people began to unknowingly push me forward in my life. They were usually over double my age, and I really enjoy spending time with people older than me. This is because I felt that they had a lot more life experience than me and could also offer me some fantastic advice from their own journeys. Just remember that the costliest advice in life is bad advice, and the worst advice that you'll ever receive is the wrong advice. The majority of people around me at that time suggest that I get myself another mortgage and look for another partner. So I listened momentarily, and I did go and look at another property at one point. In fact, I ended up putting in an offer on that same property, which was accepted. However, I pulled out at the very last moment as something didn't feel right, and my intuition was screaming to me, "No!" I think it was because I could see myself falling back into that same old work home trap. It got to a stage where I realised that I should be extremely cautious of who I took advice from, to the point I would be very careful taking advice from anyone who I would not happily trade places with. Don't get me wrong, it's beneficial to learn from other people's failures. However, I noticed the people who surrounded me all wanted to give me their safe option advice, which I decided to ignore. I didn't want to conform to society norms. They were all still telling me that I needed to find another partner, believing, like I once did, that true happiness is found in materialistic items and other people. From then on, I decided to do what my granddad had always told me, which was to focus on looking after number one. I had to stay true to my authentic self and start doing things for me. When you start taking care of yourself, you start feeling better, you start looking better, and you even start to attract better. Because it all starts with you. Remember that you are unique, and that is your superpower. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you someone else is the greatest accomplishment. If you want to improve your life, you must improve yourself first. So work on you and don't stop working. Over the next few months, I started to use any free time to learn new things, and would also listen to multiple episodes and different self-development podcasts each day. I learned that your mind is like a plastic bag, because when pulled and stretched, it will never go back to the same size again. I felt as if I was brainwashing myself to be successful. Whilst listening to another podcast episode, it said that your comfort zone is where your dreams go to die. And this quote instantly stamped itself into my mind. Now thinking about it, all the greatest achievements in my life were from a place of discomfort, and from me taking small and frequent steps outside of my comfort zone. By doing this, I noticed I would then build the courage to push myself that little bit further the next time. When 2020 came around, it was my time to level up, so I then raised my travel goal to visit 20 countries throughout that year. This filled me with so much happiness to tell all the people around me, because yet again I was progressing. Every time I visited a new country, I would set myself a challenge to push myself more and more outside of my comfort zone. This could be anything from asking a girl if she would like to go for a drink, all the way to doing something crazy, something scary that I had always previously feared. By voluntarily heading towards pain and discomfort, I noticed that I was growing as a person. With repetition, my courage and confidence were both strengthening and expanding. This is because courage is like a muscle, and it is strengthened with use. By doing the things you fear regularly, you will soon question yourself as to why you even feared them in the first place. I now look at fear as false evidence appearing real, because fear is not real. Fear is just a picture that we have painted within our own minds, which is usually the worst case scenario. I concluded that every time I faced my fear, it ended up being nothing like how I initially thought it would be. And most of the time, it was in fact an enjoyable experience. So do the things that scare you until they don't. It was late February 2020, and I had previously booked a long weekend to visit Rome. However, I had just heard about this new virus called COVID-19 and realised that it was also in Italy. As much as it sounded slightly worrying to me at the time, I was not prepared to let this stop me from visiting. The first night at the hostel, I was told that tonight was karaoke night. I was sat there in the common room and the karaoke evening started. I had always enjoyed karaoke, however, had only previously participated at home in front of friends and family. Tonight was the night I had to consciously remove myself from my comfort zone again, so I picked a song that I believed I could sing to a respectable level and sung away. Once I had finished, there was a round of applause, which made me think I didn't do too bad. This boosted my confidence to then go on and sing another few karaoke songs. By pushing myself outside of my comfort zone and singing in front of an unknown crowd, it allowed me to start conversations within the group, which also led me to gaining lifetime friends with a few amazing individuals. People come into your life as a warning or an example. So I'm going to start the next chapter on the next live. So thank you so much, everybody. Join me on the next one. If you want to get on the wait list, visit dyingwithregrets.ryannurse.com or send me a DM. Peace out. Bye bye.